Hey everybody, we haven't covered this topic at all in our AP Computer Science class. Um, it has to do with the double equals Boolean check versus the dot equals check that is run on strings like we told you guys. We're going to get much deeper into this later, but I wanted to kind of tell you guys about the difference between integers and strings and how they act differently. So let's take a look. What would you expect to see if A is 1 and B is 1? Is it true that A is equal to B? Let's take a look down here. On the bottom, we do get that that's true. Now let's say if I set B to 0, right? Would we expect to get true or false? In all logical worlds, we would get false, and we do. Now what if I set B to be 0, and then I incremented it? Now B should be 1. Should this now be equal? Let's see. Yes, they are, because B turned out to be 1, and so is A. So let's watch how weird this is. When Java does this with strings, it's a little bit different. All right, so let's just kind of start with a string, my name. And I'm going to say my name is Brian, because indeed it is, not Brina. And my dog's name, I'm going to say that my dog's name is Brian. Okay, so this is where we can kind of run into a little bit of confusion here. Is it indeed true that my name is equal to my dog's name? Now, some people may have checked this. You guys have, some students of mine have been trying this out and are saying, hey, you know what you told us about like using dot equals to check strings for equality? Well, I tried it with something like this and I get true. See, watch, Mr. Fleischman. Look, they're true. You don't need to use dot equals. Well, here, let's look. Okay, so notice up here we have B being 0 and incremented to become 1. Let's go ahead and do this. Let's make my dog's name Brian. If I run this test, I should get false, right? Because Brian is not the same as Brian, and indeed that's true. Now, we can actually take this string, my dog's name, and add to it. Okay, so check this out. I can add the letter N to the end of the dog's name. And just to be sure, let's print my dog's name just to make sure this worked out. I print my dog's name, I get Brian, and that is the same as my name, right? So what if I checked now to see, is my dog's name the same as my name? Let's see. Is it true? No, it is not. Even though, remember, we just checked. We just checked to see that my dog's name was Brian. Hold on a second. I am losing my mind here. This is not cool, is it? Let's see if we can figure this out. Oops, it's out, my bad. And now it really doesn't want to behave. So let's check this out. I'm going to grab this. I want to make sure that I'm doing this right. Are we sure? So my dog's name is there. My name will go underneath it. I am just baffled, right? This is what a lot of people are going to be running into. So I'm going to print my dog's name. I'm going to print my name. And you're telling me that those are not the same? What? Okay, so here's what's going on, okay? So when Java is dealing with strings, right, what they're doing is this variable is not actually holding this information inside the variable. This is what you call a reference to a string object, okay? So this is like a little address. Somewhere in the computer, in Java's memory, there's this string object called Brian, and my name has the instructions or the directions on how to get there. Okay, now let's kind of look at this one, right? Now my dog's name is pointing to a completely different object called Brian, right? So when I append this on here, right, I'm actually creating another new string object called Brian, right? And it's going to go ahead and add to it. And this Brian is not the same object as this Brian, right? The Brian that my dog's name is holding is not pointing to the exact same object that this variable my name is pointing to. There are two identical string objects, but they're not the same one, right? So if we look at this now and we go down here and change this to dot equals, oops, see an object, it wants an object, and strings indeed are objects. So let's go ahead and check to see if it dot equals my name. It will compare them for identicalness. Are these two objects identical to one another? Yes, they are. Okay, so what happened in that first part then? I don't understand it, right? So can we go back here? Remember when I said that my dog's name is Brian, My name is Brian, and then I sys out printed this, checked my name being equal to my dog's name, and we got true. Well, what can we infer from that then, right? What can we infer from my name and my dog's name? They're pointing to the exact same object. Okay, so the way we wrote it here, Java assigned my name and my dog's name. It was like this thing had a reference or an address to pointing toward a string object that contained this string of characters. My dog's name went ahead and was pointed to the exact same one. Okay, but we tricked it when we did this. Check it out. When we said Brya, that created a completely new string object, different than this one, so that when we appended it, we added the n onto it, even though it was the same, it looked the same as Brian, it was a different object. It was this one, there's a different object with an n tacked onto it, and it's not the same Brian as this one, right? So the dot equals will, anytime your program, as we get further on into the year, has objects and the objects are being manipulated, changed, morphed into different forms, dot equals is going to check to see if those objects are actually containing the same information. And you're not going to run into this issue of, if they're actually the same object or not. Okay, so that's the difference between dot equals and equals. Okay, so the double equals Boolean operator checks to see if the object is exactly the same object as the other one. The dot equals operator will check to see if any two objects are identical, and it will still even return true if the objects are the same object themselves. So probably not a full enough discussion for you guys to be totally feeling great about it. But this is where you can run into trouble if you don't use dot equals on strings. It's always just safer to use dot equals, unless you're, of course, interested in knowing whether or not those are exactly the same object in Java's memory. So again, this is a big time sneak preview. We have a whole unit dedicated to objects and reference variables and how they're different than integers and primitive types. But hopefully this kind of starts to kind of open up the conversation that you guys can explore this in the future. Leave me a comment, say hi, criticize me, make a joke, whatever. I love hearing from you guys, and I'll check in with you guys later. Take care.